Soccerex connected, day one. Ben Jacobs with you, almost coming to a close. We're here all week. Hashtag Soccerex connected. If you'd like to engage with us, we'll have signed shirts to give away every single day. Today, we are sponsored by the Johan Cruyff Institute. Cruyff had a ton of different nicknames, and as a consequence, we've asked you all day long, what is your nickname, or what is your favourite footballer's nickname, to stand a chance of winning a number of signed shirts. You basically get a pick if you're selected at random. I've got Edwin van der Sar, Laurie Lindsay, Deco, and a number of other ex and current footballers. And whoever picks the shirt today will find another one and stick it into the pile for tomorrow. So 5 chances to win throughout the course of the week. Thanks to Utkarash Bushan, who says Crouch Eno for Peter Crouch. And he adds that in Portuguese, Eno means little, which is why he finds it amusing because Peter Crouch was absolutely giant. T.O. or Ty Ortega, as your handle actually is, says Toby-Wan Kenobi and Janikan Skywalker for Toby Alderweireld and Jan Vertonghen at Spurs. And we've had another one for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer as well, the baby-faced assassin. So thanks to all of you for engaging. We'll announce the winner on social media. Through our next panel, you still have time to enter as well. And tomorrow, myself and Patrick McCrenna, the head of sales and marketing at Soccerex, will be kicking the day off with Soccerex Fast Forward, and we'll reiterate the winner then and tell you which shirt they've picked to, and we'll look ahead to day 2. But let's round things off. Last but certainly not least, we're really excited about this. We're finishing off the day, as we will each evening this week, with a very special session powered by Soccerex Heritage. And we'll be looking into the legacy of the 1930 World Cup, what made it one of the most celebrated football tournaments of all time, and how it has left an impact on modern football too. Each day we'll look at a different aspect. I believe that today we're starting with some history. We are joined by Aldo Mazzucchelli, a professor at the Republica University in Uruguay, Petra Tabarelli, an archivist for historian, Esteban Berkerman, a football historian, a professor, and the founder of Entre, Tiempos, Max Gehringer, a Brazilian author, and James Brown, a US soccer historian and one of our leading voices as well behind Soccerex Heritage. And to steer you through this fascinating and historical panel, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator as well, who's also a football historian at Limoges University. It is a very good evening to Lorenzo Jalabert.
Hi, it's thanks to the organizers. It's a big pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be to see all these people passionate about everything that surrounds this beautiful game. So, as you all are all aware, saying that the football is a massive phenomenon would be today an understatement. You all very aware of that, even more so today with this Soccerex. I mean, 5 days of conferences, thousands of attendance. It says something. But football wasn't always born as such. It came from somewhere. To understand where we stand now, we have to go back more than a century and a half. So yeah, we need to go and explore this past to really understand this phenomenon that we see today, and that's a bit the idea behind this heritage conference in the Soccerex. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. More specifically, today we're going to be studying or visiting a very special landmark in football history. That is the first World Cup that took place in 1930 in Uruguay. And it's very important, not only because it's the first World Cup, but also because it kind of set the marks and fix the genetics of the following tournament. And yeah, it's a pretty interesting topic. So, as James said before, we have a very interesting panel, people from Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil. So it's going to be, I guess, pretty amazing. So first of all, maybe if we talk about the World Cup, we have to go back to the beginnings of it, to the beginnings of FIFA. You know, FIFA was born in 1904. It was a global institution from the start. It wanted in its birth to host an international tournament, but it only did so 25, 26 years later in 1930. And those 2.5 decades are very interesting to understand what football became afterwards. It was a decade that was mainly characterized by two features: the controversy on amateurism versus professionalism, and also a pretty interesting factor, the absence of England in that birth of FIFA and the World Cup in 1930. So maybe we can start with Petra. Can you tell us more about those very special decades?
Hello, my name is Petra. I'm from Germany, and part of the legacy of the very first World Cup is the beginning of modern football, the beginning of the professional football, already present in England for 50 years. It is in the 20s and the 1920s in particular that has given rise to debates about professional sports in numerous countries around the world. The same debates as 50 years earlier in Great Britain. Should athletes earn money? And if they are paid, do they still carry the noble idea of virtue, or is it just about winning and about money? Shouldn't football, remain purely amateur sport? In theory, amateurism and professionalism were strictly separated and the fronts hardened. In practice, the distinction between amateurism and professionalism was often blurred. Some administrators took the view that athletes could be compensated for legitimate expenses and still remain amateurs. Interpretations of what consisted legitimate expenses differed. There were still benefits like, for example, a flat. Many associations in Europe insisted that football should remain unpaid. Football teaches you the virtues of gentlemen, honesty, self-discipline, responsibility, self-organization, in short, fair play. Or the virtues of a soldier, commitment to one's own team until the last second, no matter how unpromising the situation is. Footballers should remain gentlemen and soldiers, not mercenaries. What does this have to do with World Cup? There have been modern Olympic Games since 1896, with a football tournament since 1908. Why another football competition? Well, Olympia was primarily European tournament and the beginning of the 20th century. This was not because sport was not played outside Europe. The opposite was the case. But a journey from Uruguay to France took several weeks back then, and it cost a lot of money. And yet, in 24, Uruguay was the first South American team to take part at the football tournament at the Olympic Games in Paris, financed by a wealthy doctor. At first, they were smiled by all the Europeans, but at the end, they were able to smile because they won the gold medal with 22 goals in 5 games. What was the difference? In South America, football was used to be a professional football with its own leagues. The Copa America first took place in 1910. For comparison, the first European Championship took place 50 years later. And of course, the opinion of many Europeans changed to the opposite, and they saw South American players as money-grabbing people. Their behavior was seen as a snub to the Olympic idol, or henceforth they should be excluded from the Games. But not all Europeans thought this way, including Jalabert, then president of the FIFA, a Frenchman. As early as 24, he and a Uruguayan forged plans to a pure football tournament, which he presented to FIFA in 98, and which then took place at the first World Cup in 30. President Jalabert and General Secretary Ivo Schricker were enthusiastic about the idea of developing FIFA into a global organization for football. Schricker said in 28, the World Cup must be as big as possible. However, without their home nation, the Commonwealth, because they were not able, because they were not part of the FIFA for quite a long, for many years, including 1930. What happened? After the foundation of FIFA in 1904, the four countries joined between 5 and 11, but left immediately after the first World Cup. They preferred to remain again among themselves, isolated, and to have as little as possible to do with the European continent. The then FA secretary and later FIFA president, Sir Stanley Rouse, recalled in his memories, after the First World War, we left FIFA in the 20s in a dispute over the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, and Hungary, re-entering international competitions so soon after the First World War.
Yeah, Petra.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so it's very interesting what you're saying. Basically, yeah, England was apart, was isolated, and you mentioned something very interesting in this road to the World Cup. You mentioned in the 1920s the emergence of a new actor in the world football that was Uruguay. That was a bit of an oddball. Maybe Aldo, can you tell us more about this this new player in the game?
Sure. So we are going to enter our parts like this way, or wait?
Yeah, because we're a bit
Petra
short in time, so I see the clock running. So yeah, I'm just gonna.
Sure. Okay. So basically, the main question I was wanted to address is, well, it's the obvious question: why Uruguay, and how come? I mean, this small South American country appeared and created such an impact. And there are, I would say, a couple of kinds of reasons to answer the question of what happened in 24. And the first one is very simple, is football quality, and I'll refer to this soon. But there are other more, say, practical or political reasons that played a role as well. So first of all, we had divisions or schisms, as they would say, occurring during the second decade of the century. Most of the football associations in South America, with, let's say, one faction officially affiliated to FIFA and the other not, or affiliated or leaning towards FIFA and the other one not. And this happened in most of the countries currently affiliated to the Confederación Sudamericana back then. So Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay, all of them had these divisions inside. And Uruguay, the division or made that the stronger faction, let's say, would remain closer to FIFA. And so this was one reason that played on the other way in Argentina, for instance. This is the main reason why Argentina couldn't make it to 24, because the strongest or the stronger faction was against FIFA. So they couldn't, like unite the football and put together a team to go. So second reason, I would say it's also political, that the government in Uruguay favored football. And Paris actually was the culmination of a sort of a 20-year policy on physical education, sports, used by the government by successive governments as educational and social integration tool. By 1924, finally, the government in Uruguay understood that football was a good opportunity to, let's say, introduce the country in Europe. So they supported the initiative of going against internal opposition, and finally that went well, and Uruguay made it. Regarding football quality, so first of all, there's some things that happened previously before the 20s. There was a long period of mutual learning between the three cities in the River Plate area, so Buenos Aires, Montevideo, and Rosario. These three cities would play, teams from these cities would play among them like all the time in between the cities at different levels, both team level and then at the national teams level as well. And by the middle of the second decade, Uruguay had put together had well established, I would say, like a generation of players that were highly competitive. And that generation won the South American Championships, as Petra mentioned, the Copa America from 1916, 1917, 1920. And then with a new younger generation, even better than the other, that had to step up due to the schism, since some of the, say, older players could not play FIFA tournaments. So this second and younger generation, Uruguayan generation, won the 1923, 24, and 26. That is 6 Copa Americas out of the first 9 played were won by Uruguay. So by the time Uruguay, with the help of government and this experience, let's say, arrived in Europe, few specialists, let alone the general public, was expecting them. And Uruguay played the 5 matches in the Summer Olympics in Paris in 1924, that, by the way, was a particularly important football event because of the number of teams, because 4 continents were represented, because Paris made for it to be like a very important and highlighted, let's say, event even within the Olympics. And so Uruguay won in the debut 7-0 to Yugoslavia, then beat the US and the locals, France 5-1 with a huge crowd in Paris, then Netherlands, and finally the final to Switzerland. Uruguay beat Switzerland 3-0. And previously had played like 9 games in Spain in preparation and won all of them in a row. So the impact was truly remarkable. I would like to finish this to mention a couple of, or to quote from a couple of passages from the press, from the European press, from the French and German press. The first one I select is from Gabriel Hanot, that one of the most important, or the most important football expert in France by the time. And he published this as a balance at Le Miroir des Sports on June 12th, so a couple of days after the final in 24. And among other things, he says, the main quality of the winners is a wonderful virtuosity in the reception, control, and use of the ball. The Uruguayans have such a complete technique that by running in front of the ball or even mastering it and then dribbling it, they have the necessary leisure to watch the position occupied by opponents and partners. In addition to the impeccable technique, the Uruguayans also use a clear-sighted tactic. The South Americans have a sure-footed and clear-eyed approach. They come and go on the field, unrolling their skein, waving their web, whose center is the goal of the opposing team. The English professionals are remarkable surveyors. The parallelogram forces hold no secrets for them. They play square, articulated with rigor and stiffness. Uruguayans are flexible people, disciples of the spirit of finesse rather than the spirit of geometry. They have pushed to perfection, and sometimes even to the point of embellishment, the art of feinting, dodging, changing feet, pivoting the body, reversing direction. But they also know how to play straight, directly, immediately. They are not only the ball jugglers, magicians. They created a beautiful soccer, elegant, but at the same time varied, fast, powerful, effective. These fine athletes are to the English professionals like Arabian horses compared to percherons. So this is part of the Gabriel Hanot. And then another journalist, especially sent to Paris from Germany, published a long piece in the Berliner Zeitung am Mittag. And I quoted 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph actually. He says, he wrote this immediately after the match with Yugoslavia. So I myself had designated the Uruguayans as the exotic prototype of the Olympiad, after having spoken with enthusiastic Spaniards of those players. But they surpassed the most exaggerated imagination and eclipsed what I and many others have seen in our lifetime. Take the impetus and shooting power of Huddersfield and Cardiff, the low combinations of Glasgow Rangers, the vigor of Sparta and the speed of Barcelona, the grace of the Viennese amateurs and of the MTK in its heyday, and take finally from all these teams the best players and from all the others a little of the style, and you get the Uruguayan team. The best English and Scottish professionals can put a lot of money in their pockets if they have to play against them. If, for example, we were to compare them with the undoubtedly good players of Spain, their brothers in language, we would be committing a footballing blasphemy. The Yugoslavs, whom they beat by 7-0, as well as they could have beaten them by 14-0, are in Europe players of the first rank. Okay. And they produce the effect of being miserable players. I'm finishing. Okay. To give a fair idea of the Uruguayan game, it is necessary to be a musical composer. Okay, so finally the point is, I would finish with this, that having won these two tournaments, 24 and 28, in such a way, actually created some troubles for Uruguay. It was not all good, especially in the political arena, because, and I think that I would like to suggest that the idea that European teams were delighted and open to concede the World Cup organization to Uruguay after 1928 would deserve much more discussion, because I've seen this idea many times, and I think it's not what happened actually.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks, Aldo. Those were some really interesting quotes, especially the one from Gabriel Ano, very famous one from the Miroir des Sports. And actually, I totally agree with you on this topic, that Uruguay wasn't the obvious host for the first World Cup. This idea was published around, but actually Uruguay seized the occasion because it had that importance as a footballing powerhouse, as you described it. They were really a team from another planet, one would say. And so yeah, they kind of snatched the possibility of hosting that first World Cup. They did so in the 1929 FIFA Congress in Barcelona, and there was a reception in the other countries very different. Let's say the Uruguayan candidacy was supported obviously by the South American teams, but not so by much in Europe. Maybe James, you can tell us what happened in the USA surrounding that will of Uruguay to host the World Cup.
Well, once the decision was put forth by Uruguay, and the great offer of paying back all of the expenses for every team, that was amazing, because as it turns out, Uruguay ended up spending over $1 million for all of the team's participations. And the US has always had, in their international competition history, they were always some of the first teams to, the first team to accept or to want to be a part of, whether it's the Olympics in 1904, or taking part in the Olympics in 24 and 28, where the US team throughout their history has never had the schism, talking about the debate between amateurism and professionalism, because the US were always professionals. So the US team, in accepting the invitation to go down to Uruguay as being one of the first teams to accept, they were made up of a large group of British immigrants. There was a misconception throughout the 1930 World Cup that the US just imported British ringers to come in because their style was different. They don't have these fancy footwork, but they do very, very, very square passing, long passes, from the outsides, and then dashing in. And this is one of the things that helped the US, especially during their golden age from 1921 to 1931. This was the best part that the US could offer, because they were able to bring together a team that had only one British professional, if you called it that. In fact, George Morehouse played for Tranmere Rovers. He played in 2 matches. But all of the other US players, they were all US citizens. And my grandfather, Jim Brown, he actually received his US citizenship while they were on the SS Monargo. They were about halfway. They had just gotten over the equator, and he got a telegram from the Bronx court saying that his papers had come in. So there's definitely no debate about the legitimacy of the U.S. team. But you have to understand that this team was a group of immigrants. I mean, the U.S. ASL League was powerful on the East Coast and the Midwest. And they were made up of people who worked in the industry, whether it was the cotton mill industry or the steel industry. Those were very, very powerful. And these owners created teams in order to create a pastime. They said, listen, we know people love playing soccer, and all of our employees love playing soccer. So we're going to offer that to the public. So industrialization, leisure time, professionalism, these were major, major reasons for why the US was able to bring a very
Okay.
strong team.
So yeah, it's very interesting. So what you say is basically the USA was from the beginning they were enthusiastic about this idea of a Uruguayan World Cup, and as you said, there was no problem for them regarding this topic that Petra addressed about professionalism and amateurism. They had no problem with that. They went all in. I believe you have some footage about the USA playing in that World Cup, some rare footage. I don't know if you want to show it now.
Yes, there is a video, and this is a 16-second video of the US team coming through the crowd during the first game against Belgium on July 13th. And these are the only images, close-up images of the US ever filmed, besides the opening ceremony. And it was actually very touching because there's a very close-up image of my grandfather at the age of 20. So that was very, very personal. And that was actually because of the work that a Uruguayan filmmaker produced a 3-part series, and of which Aldo was the screenwriter for, the scriptwriter. So we were very fortunate to get access to that footage. Now the U.S. and their performance throughout the World Cup, they trained and trained and trained prior to their first matches. So their physical strength was very important.
Okay. So
okay.
I don't know if the images are going to come. Maybe we can show them later. Let's maybe move on to. So yeah, we addressed the USA topic. They were really enthusiastic. They weren't part of the South American football, yet they came. But there was really a different setting in Europe, as Aldo mentioned. This idea of a World Cup at the other side of the world against teams like Uruguay and Argentina that had won everything in the Olympic Games of 24 and 28. They weren't really into that. So at the end of the day, there was only 4 teams from Europe going to Uruguay. There was Belgium, there was France, there was Yugoslavia and Romania. I think Max Gehringer had something to say about that European absenteeism. Maybe Max, you can tell us about that, and maybe you can also tell us about another big player that was expected at this World Cup, that was Brazil. So yeah, we'll listen to you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I am Renato, Max's son. He is the researcher. He does all the work. I'm just an assistant researcher at best. I did have a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm not going to use it in respect to time. I'd like to start off by explaining the Brazilian rough road to the World Cup of 1930, because the rivalry between São Paulo and Rio, the 2 biggest cities, have been growing for 3 decades. Rio was the biggest city, the most influential. São Paulo is growing in wealth and political influence. So football is no different. There is tremendous regional rivalry between the two leagues. And just to make it clear, Cariocas are from Rio, Paulistas are from São Paulo. I might be saying these names again. So in 1919, there was a symbolic title for national champion, which the Paulistas requested to be postponed. The Cariocas went ahead and declared themselves champions. Since the headquarters of the Football Federation was in Rio, the decision was sustained. The Paulistas had given up the powers for the headquarters to be in Rio because they wanted a delegate in the technical commission for the World Cup and everything related to the national team. So in 1920, there's a re-election, a Carioca is re-elected, Paulistas and once again left out. And in retaliation, they forbid all their players from participating in the national team. The call-ups for the 1920 South American Championship made by the CBD, ignoring protests from São Paulo, had 11 Paulistas and 10 Cariocas. The Paulistas did not play. Brazil played with an All Carioca team, finished 3rd out of 4 for the next 2 years of the South American Championship. 1922 was an atypical truce between the two leagues, and Brazil finally played with a full squad and won the tournament, albeit in unusual circumstances because Uruguay abandoned the competition due to biased refereeing, right? 1923, the bickering picked up again. Still no delegate from São Paulo, so no players from São Paulo. 1924, the CBD decides to forego all international competitions to avoid any embarrassments. In 1925, once again, a full team is assembled, but we lose to Argentina. Now, this defeat hit the Brazilians really hard because we'd always assume we were losing because we weren't taking our best teams. You know, we're good. If we had a full team, we would win. This is the first time this happened with a full team. So the CBD forgoes competitions for the next 3 years. So we're approaching 1930. Brazil hasn't played once since 1925 as a full team. Paulistas once again repeat, they want delegates. Cariocas are unwilling to comply. The first call-up for the national team had 15 Paulistas and 8 Cariocas. A few weeks later, due to the discussions being unable to be resolved, an all Carioca team went to Uruguay. So this means that a second-tier team really went to Uruguay. It was a half a team. All the best players from the country were from São Paulo. There were some last-minute attempts to avoid embarrassment because we really felt that an all Carioca team was not up to the challenge. And this is exactly what happened. So in terms of results, the 1930 World Cup was one of the worst for Brazilian club football, not the worst, but we would achieve reasonable success in the years to come.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting for every football history sensible person. You know, today we see Brazil as the one country with 5 World Cups, and there's this idea that Brazil is like they have always been the best, but no. It's a later process. I mean, Brazil really explodes in the 1950s. With the Pelé generation, and later they start really being conquerors. So yeah, you quite well explain why they weren't the top dog at that moment, and also they underperformed because they only had half the team, and we saw that when they lost against Yugoslavia, people didn't understand that loss. So but yeah, in this event of the World Cups, there was this first one, there was really two big kingpins. There was two major teams, and everybody understood that those teams were going to dominate it, and that explains also why Europe didn't go to that competition. They were the finalists of the 1928 Olympic Games that was played in Amsterdam. It was Uruguay on the one hand, and on the other hand, it was Argentina, who was current South American champion, and everybody was expecting that team of Argentina. Yet in 1930, as in 1928, Argentina lost again to Uruguay. So maybe Esteban, can you tell us what happened with this Argentinian team? Why didn't they really do as expected in the 1930 World Cup?
Yeah, sure. I think that we shouldn't miss the fact that Argentina, at the time of the 1930 World Cup, was the South American champions. Argentina had won had been triumphs at the 1929 South American Championship here in Buenos Aires. So if that could happen, why Argentina could not repeat that title in Uruguay? How or why Argentina could maybe not produce another performance with the same players or almost the same players of that team of 1929, which attained the South American Championship against Uruguay here in Buenos Aires. So that's the first mystery about Argentina. But there are a lot of other mysteries that I could start to research and to find out what really happened for Argentina to not being such successful in the 1930 World Cup. So there's another thing we should have in count, that is, in the process of the Argentina making up of the team, in the teaming up of Argentina, were serious problems, really serious problems that here in Argentina aren't really well known, because no one ever did research it properly. No one did pay the attention that it really deserved for it to be researched. So thanks to James Brown, I started to research that process, and I could find out really why Argentina couldn't have at that time or in the 1930 World Cup the very best players from all the country, and not only from Buenos Aires. Because if you look the procedences of the Argentinian players, you can note that only one of them did not emerge or start in Buenos Aires, his career, his footballistic career. All of them, besides that one only player who came from Tucumán, a province here in Argentina, which was Cividini, a half, all the rest of the players came from Buenos Aires. Even the one who was born in the Islas Canarias of Spain, who was Rico Suarez, another half. He was born, or he was not born, but he was raised here in Buenos Aires. So here, or he was really another of that Buenos Aires players that played that World Cup. And it's really unexplainable why in the 1930 World Cup weren't any players of Rosario, that city already Aldo mentioned, or another cities like very good football teams like Santa Fe or even Santiago del Estero, which was at 1928 the Argentinian Championships of Province Leagues tournament. So really it's very interesting to research that whole process and to find out that it's all about teaming up and teaming up well. I think that's the main lesson all that process and all this research could give for us, that Argentina was always a winning nation in football when it had players from all the provinces or most of the provinces of the country, and not only from the main province, which is Buenos Aires. No, and it's really interesting, for example, to find out that there was no players from Rosario because of a strike, which was the first football players strike here in Argentina. It really smashed me, that discovery, because no one here knows that. It's really something buried on time. So it's really interesting to know how we, all the researchers, we are working on this subject by teaming up well, could improve our job and our researches, but also to find out that also the team, and especially the team of Argentina, could be very better prepared and very better formed if it had in count a lot of players who were playing in another cities or another parts of the country at that time. I think that explains a lot what finally happened on the final, because one of the players from Rosario, which was casted at the very first moment when the trainer Olazar gave the free players to be elected for the board of Argentinian Association, was Spitale, Cataldo Spitale, who was a Rosarian player, who was from Rosario, and could have easily and very well replaced Monti at that final. And he wasn't there because he wasn't in the squad, he wasn't in the roster because of that strike. No, that strike banned him and banned also Octavio Diaz, a great goalkeeper from Rosario Central. So if Spitale was there, I think Monti could have been very well replaced at that final, and it wouldn't have been replaced by Sumelsu, who was injured at that time. And Monti played finally, but played the final, but Sumelsu played a much earlier. So nor Monti or Sumelsu could really fit into the team. And in the final, Monti played very scared, as you all know, sure. So Monti couldn't be replaced by another player of his position. And that was in part because Sumelsu was injured and could not replace him at that time. But
Okay.
if it's Spitali was there, he would have been replacing him.
Yeah, that's thanks, Esteban. That's pretty interesting because for the people that are specialists about this history of the World Cups, and especially this first one, that's pretty new. Knowing what happened with the Argentinian selection, and seeing how there were some decisions that were made prior to the World Cup, and seeing which players they selected, and that had a massive impact on the outcome. And as Esteban says, this is a pretty new topic. Back in the days, after at the end of July, after the final, when Argentina lost to Uruguay 4-2, the newspapers in Argentina weren't really speaking about this misselection of players, or if they did, it was really a secondary topic. The big idea that we see in the newspapers in Argentina was that they were robbed from this final. Maybe Aldo, can you give us a few words about this controversy that was fabricated after the final?
Well, actually, I don't know if that's possible in such a small time. I see 3 minutes remaining. So, but basically one general idea, I think, is idea, I would say, is that from the example of Brazil and Argentina, we could contrast with that what happened to that generation I mentioned in Uruguay. That was a generation formed in 1923, actually, for the South American tournament. And then that generation somehow, maybe because of its success, managed to remain together up to the World Cup in 1930. And some people have advanced the idea that having a national team that where players know each other, like in a club, let's say, playing together in many games in South American championships, friendlies, and the Olympics and the World Cup, made a big difference. So actually, it's true that both Argentina and Brazil had different political problems, political issues during all the decade that maybe prevented them to form the best lineups for these games. But at the same time, in Argentina in particular, there was a huge political issues inside the association, the Asociación de Fútbol Argentino. Actually, it had another name by the time. And the schism had not resolved properly before, apart from the strike, because the same thing happened later in 35 when a new South American championship was played, and periodicals in Argentina would say, well, this is because we never put together the best team and we leave provincianos, as they wrote, out of the team, and etc. So they were saying there were political reasons why the team was not well prepared. I would say that along with the expectations that the press always creates in Argentina, even to this time, but particularly that time, if you read the papers in 1930 before the final, you see that the Argentine newspapers practically unanimously would consider that the final was like a formality. They would win, and that's going to be it. And of course, you cannot do that. You can say that in any football match, and particularly against a team that had won consistently all the finals except for some South American championships, like in '29. So this I think was a more generational and political context that explains what happened. That basically was confirmation of what had been happened for 10 years by that time.
Okay, thanks, Aldo. Yeah, so we're getting pretty short on time. It's really, time is flying. So maybe if we still have some few minutes, can we open to a Q&A if there's some questions around? During that time, maybe we can broadcast the few images that we have from that final, because we didn't mention it, but cinematography was already a thing back in the days. So there was a film that was made during that World Cup, and especially during the final. The final was in its totality, it was filmed. Unfortunately, today we don't find it. Oh, okay, so I guess we're not gonna have time for the Q&A, so let's just cut by saying thanks to everyone for your participation, and I hope it went well, and live on with that research about this beautiful topic. So I'm giving it to you, James, back.
Thank you very much, everybody.